The sledgehammer came down on the oak log with a satisfying crack, splitting it clean in half. And that's when I saw her marching across my front lawn like she owned the place. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, squinting against the late afternoon sun here in Bend, Oregon, watching this woman in pristine white capris and a visor approach with a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the sound of my neighbor's lawnmower. "You need to stop what you're doing immediately." I set down the sledgehammer and pulled off my work gloves, confused. It was barely 3 in the afternoon on a Saturday, and I'd only been splitting wood for about 20 minutes. "Can I help you? I'm Katherine Chambers, president of the Ponderosa Heights HOA board." She stopped about 6 feet from my woodpile, her nose wrinkled like she'd stepped in something unpleasant. "And you're in violation of our community rules. I'm Samuel Jenkins, and I'd bought this house just 4 months ago." The HOA documents had been extensive, sure, but I'd read through most of them. Nothing had mentioned anything about firewood splitting. Violation of what exactly? Katherine flipped through the pages on her clipboard with practiced efficiency. Section 12, subsection D of the revised community standards, which were voted on and passed 2 weeks ago. No firewood splitting on weekends. It creates excessive noise and disturbs the peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood. 2 weeks ago, I didn't get any notice about new rules. It was sent via email to all residents. She looked up at me with that particular expression of superiority that some people wear like a second face. "Perhaps you should check your spam folder." I pulled out my phone right there, opening my email app and searching for anything from the HOA. The most recent message was from 3 months ago, welcoming me to the neighborhood. I don't have anything from 2 weeks ago. "That's not my problem. The rules are the rules, Mr. Jenkins." She tapped her pen against the clipboard. "I'm going to have to issue you a warning. If you continue, you'll face fines starting at $100 per violation." "Hold on." I held up my hand. I checked the Bend City Noise Ordinance before I started any of this. Residential noise from yard work and maintenance is allowed until 8 p.m. I'm well within my rights here. Katherine's expression hardened. City ordinances don't supersede HOA regulations. When you purchased your home, you signed the covenant agreeing to follow all current and future rules established by the board. Future rules that I wasn't notified about. You were notified. Email notification is considered legally sufficient per Oregon HOA law. She pulled a pre-printed violation notice from her clipboard and held it out to me. "This is your official warning. Have a good day, Mr. Jenkins." She turned on her heel and walked back across my lawn, leaving 2 distinct footprints in the section I just receded. I stood there holding the violation notice, feeling my blood pressure rise. The wood pile beside my garage wasn't going to split itself, and winter in Bend meant I needed to get through about 4 cords before the snow really started flying. I'd specifically bought a house with a wood-burning stove because I liked the idea of being self-sufficient, of cutting my heating costs and having the satisfaction of physical work. I walked inside and opened my laptop, pulling up the HOA website. After some digging, I found a link to recent community updates that I'd never noticed before. Sure enough, there was a document dated 2 weeks prior outlining several new rules. The firewood splitting ban was nestled between restrictions on chicken coops and a new regulation about the maximum height of ornamental grasses. At the bottom of the page, in small text, it stated that the rules had been unanimously approved by the board at their monthly meeting. I scrolled through the list of board members. Katherine Chambers, President; Donald Martinez, Treasurer; Patricia Sullivan, Secretary. That was it. 3 people had apparently decided on behalf of the entire neighborhood that nobody could split wood on weekends. My phone rang. It was my buddy Marcus, who lived 2 streets over, also in Ponderosa Heights. "Hey man, you get hit by the HOA hammer today?" he asked without preamble. "Yeah, just now. Katherine Chambers showed up while I was splitting wood. She got me last weekend. I was trying to get my winter supply ready, and she threatened me with fines. I thought she was bluffing until I got a bill in the mail yesterday. $200 for continued violation after verbal warning. You're kidding. I wish." Apparently she drove by twice last Saturday, and I was still working, so she counted it as 2 separate violations. Marcus sighed. "I'm tempted to just pay someone to split the wood during the week, but that seems stupid. Did you get any email about the new rules?" "Nope. Found out about it when she showed up. I checked my email after, and there was nothing there. She claims it was sent to everyone." I leaned back in my chair, thinking. The city noise ordinance is pretty clear. Residential maintenance activities are permitted until 8 p.m. I don't see how the HOA can override municipal law. Good luck with that argument. These HOA boards think they're running their own little kingdoms. Marcus paused. "Hey, there's actually an HOA meeting this Thursday night at the community center. Maybe you should show up and ask about it." "I think I will." We hung up, and I spent the next hour researching Oregon HOA law and municipal noise ordinances. The more I read, the more convinced I became that Katherine was overstepping. HOAs could establish reasonable rules, sure, but they couldn't directly contradict municipal ordinances, especially when it came to activities that were explicitly permitted by city law. The noise ordinance for Bend was clear. Daytime hours on weekends allowed for typical residential activities, including lawn maintenance, construction work with proper permits, and general yard work. There was no carve-out that gave HOAs the authority to ban specific legal activities. That Thursday evening, I drove to the community center. The building was one of those modern multi-purpose facilities with large windows and expensive landscaping that we all paid for through our monthly HOA dues. Inside, about 15 people were scattered around a conference room with uncomfortable-looking chairs arranged in rows facing a long table. Katherine sat in the center seat, flanked by Donald and Patricia. She glanced up as I entered, and something flickered across her face, recognition maybe, or irritation. I took a seat in the back row and waited while they went through the usual boring business. Budget reports, discussion about the pool maintenance schedule for next summer, approval of new landscaping proposals. It was all very procedural and dry. Finally, Katherine asked if there were any items from residents. I stood up. "Yes, I have a question about the new weekend firewood splitting ban." The room got quiet. A few people turned to look at me with interest. "What's your question, Mr. Jenkins?" Katherine's tone was professionally pleasant, but her eyes were cold. "I'm wondering about the legal basis for a rule that directly contradicts the Bend Municipal Noise Ordinance, which explicitly allows residential maintenance activities until 8 p.m. The HOA has the authority to establish community standards that promote peaceful enjoyment of the neighborhood," Katherine replied smoothly. "This was outlined in the covenant you signed when you purchased your property." "I understand that, but my question is about the hierarchy of law. Can an HOA ban an activity that's explicitly permitted by city ordinance?" Donald leaned forward, clearing his throat. He was a heavy-set man with a carefully groomed beard. "The covenant you signed gives the HOA broad authority to establish rules. If you feel this is inappropriate, you're welcome to bring a motion to the board to reconsider." "How would I do that?" Patricia, A thin woman with glasses on a chain around her neck spoke up. Any homeowner can submit a written petition with signatures from at least 15% of the community members. The board would then be required to hold a vote at the next scheduled meeting. And how many homes are in Ponderosa Heights? 234, Patricia said. I did the math quickly. I'd need at least 36 signatures. Okay, and in the meantime, what happens if I continue splitting wood on weekends during the hours permitted by city ordinance? Catherine's expression hardened. You'll be fined according to the schedule outlined in the community rules. $100 for the first offense, $200 for the second, and $500 for each subsequent offense. Even though I'd be operating within legal parameters set by the municipality. The HOA rules apply to all residents equally. She looked around the room as if seeking support from the others present. A few people nodded. This isn't personal, Mr. Jenkins. Several residents complained about noise from firewood splitting, and the board responded to those concerns. How many residents complained? Catherine's jaw tightened. I don't have that information in front of me right now. Was there any community input before the rule was passed? Any notification that it was being considered? The board has the authority to pass rules without prior community notification, as long as residents are informed after the fact. She shuffled some papers in front of her. If there are no other questions, I'd like to move on to the next agenda item. I sat down, frustrated but not defeated. After the meeting ended, several people approached me in the parking lot. An older man named Robert introduced himself and said he'd been annoyed by the new rule as well. A woman named Jennifer mentioned that she'd never received the email notification either. By the time I got to my truck, I had 5 phone numbers and email addresses from people who were interested in signing a petition. Over the next week, I drafted a simple petition requesting that the board rescind the weekend firewood splitting ban, citing the conflict with municipal noise ordinances. I printed out copies and started going door to door in the evenings after work. I'm a software developer, so I work from home most days, which gave me some flexibility. The responses were mixed. Some people signed immediately, sharing their own frustrations with the HOA board. Others were hesitant, worried about causing waves or getting on Catherine's bad side. A surprising number of people had no idea the rule existed because they'd never received the email notification. By the following Saturday, I had 42 signatures, well over the required threshold. I scanned the petition and emailed it to the board, then printed a copy and dropped it off at Catherine's house, which was a massive 2-story with a perfectly manicured lawn and not a single blade of grass out of place. She answered the door in yoga clothes, looking annoyed at the interruption. Mr. Jenkins, I wanted to hand-deliver this. I held out the petition. I've gathered signatures from over 40 residents requesting that the board reconsider the weekend firewood splitting ban. Katherine took the papers, glancing at them briefly. I'll bring this up at the next board meeting. When is that? 3 weeks from now. 3 weeks. The next scheduled meeting should be next Thursday. We had to reschedule due to conflicts. She started to close the door. You'll receive notification via email. I'd appreciate if you could also send physical mail, since there seems to be an issue with email notifications reaching all residents. Her eyes narrowed. The HOA is not required to send physical mail for routine communications. Email is sufficient. Then perhaps we should discuss upgrading the notification system at the next meeting. It seems like a significant number of residents aren't receiving these emails. I'll take your suggestion under advisement. The door closed before I could respond. I stood on her welcome mat for a moment, irritated. Something about the way she dismissed my concerns felt deliberate. I walked back to my truck and sat there for a minute, thinking. Then I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. "Hey, does your HOA email come from a specific address?" "Yeah, it's from admin@ponderosaheightshoa.com. "Why?" "I'm going to check something. Talk to you later." Back home, I opened my laptop and started digging through my email settings. I searched for any messages from that domain and found nothing, not even in my spam folder. Then I checked my email filters. Nothing there either. On a hunch, I logged into the HOA website and checked my profile settings. There it was, my email address listed correctly, but there was a note next to it. "Email delivery failed, please update contact information." I took a screenshot, then tried to understand what would cause a delivery failure. My email was working fine for everything else. I decided to call the HOA management company directly. The number was listed at the bottom of the website. A bored-sounding receptionist answered. "Cascade Property Management, this is Denise." "Hi, I'm a resident of Ponderosa Heights and I'm having trouble receiving HOA emails. Can you help me figure out why?" "What's your address?" I gave her my street address and name. "Okay, let me pull up your account," I heard typing. It shows here that your email address is marked as invalid." "Invalid? I use it every day for work. Can you see when it was marked invalid?" More typing. "Looks like it was flagged on March 15th. That was less than a week after I'd moved in. Do you know why it was flagged?" It just says administrative update. Sometimes emails bounce back, and we mark them as invalid so we don't keep trying to send to them. "But my email works fine. Can you try removing that flag?" "I can, but I need approval from the board president first. It's a policy thing." "Of course it is," I muttered. "Can you submit that request for me?" "Sure, I'll send an email to Katherine Chambers. She usually responds within a few days." I thanked her and hung up, feeling like I was starting to see a pattern. My email had been flagged as invalid right after I moved in, conveniently preventing me from receiving any HOA communications. Then a new rule gets passed, and I'm immediately hit with a violation for something I had no way of knowing was against the rules. The next morning, I got a formal letter in the mail from the HOA. It was a fine notice, $200 for continued violation of community standards. Attached was a photograph of me splitting wood in my driveway, time stamped from the previous Saturday at 4:30 p.m. I called Marcus immediately. "Did Katherine drive around taking pictures last Saturday?" "Probably. She does that. She's like the neighborhood surveillance system. This is getting ridiculous. I'm not paying this fine." "Dude, they can put a lien on your house if you don't pay HOA fines." "Not if the fines are based on rules that violate municipal law." I was getting more convinced of my position the more I researched. "I think I need to talk to a lawyer. That's going to cost more than just paying the fines. It's the principle. Plus, if she's going to fine me $500 every weekend I split wood, I'll hit lawyer costs pretty quickly anyway." I spent that afternoon calling lawyers. Most of them didn't handle HOA disputes, or they wanted retainers that were way out of my budget. Finally, I found a guy named Thomas Werner who specialized in property law and had dealt with HOA cases before. His office was in downtown Bend, in one of those renovated brick buildings near the river. I met with him on Tuesday. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with the kind of casual professionalism that comes from working in a city where people wear hiking boots to business meetings. "So let me get this straight," he said after I'd explained the situation. "The HOA passed a rule banning weekend firewood splitting. You didn't receive notification because your email was mysteriously flagged as invalid shortly after you moved in. And now, They're fining you for an activity that's explicitly permitted under city noise ordinances. That's the summary, yeah. Thomas leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. Oregon law is pretty clear about HOA authority. They can establish reasonable rules, but those rules can't contradict state or municipal law. The key word is reasonable. A court would likely find that banning an activity during hours when it's explicitly permitted by city ordinance is unreasonable. So I have a case, potentially. But here's the thing, these cases can drag on. The HOA has insurance and legal funds from everyone's dues. They can afford to fight. Can you? I thought about my savings account. I don't know. What would this cost? If we can resolve it with a strongly worded letter, maybe $1,000. If it goes to court, you're looking at $5,000 to $15,000, possibly more. I felt my stomach sink. That's a lot of money to split firewood. It is, but sometimes it's not about the firewood. He pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. Tell me more about this Katherine Chambers. I spent the next 20 minutes detailing every interaction, the timing of the email issue, the way she dismissed the petition, the photograph. Thomas listened carefully, occasionally asking questions. Has she targeted anyone else specifically? My friend Marcus got fined too. And I got the impression at the HOA meeting that other people have had issues with her. Okay, here's what I suggest. Let me draft a letter to the HOA board outlining the legal issues with this rule and demanding they rescind your fines and the rule itself. We'll give them 14 days to respond. That'll cost you $500. If they don't respond appropriately, we'll discuss next steps. It was money I hadn't planned to spend, but I agreed. Thomas said he'd have the letter drafted by the end of the week. That Saturday, I decided to test things. I waited until 1 p.m., well within the legal hours, and started splitting wood. I'd only been at it for about 30 minutes when Katherine's white SUV pulled up. She got out with her phone already up, taking pictures. "Mr. Jenkins, you're racking up quite the bill." "I'm operating within the hours permitted by Bend City Ordinance," I called back, not stopping my work. "The city ordinance doesn't matter. You're violating HOA rules. I've consulted with a lawyer who disagrees with your interpretation." That made her pause. "You're wasting your money." "That's my decision to make." I split another log. "I've also requested that the board rescind this rule with supporting signatures from over 40 residents. When is that going to be addressed?" "The next board meeting is scheduled for 3 weeks from now, as I told you." "And why was the regular meeting schedule changed?" "That's board business." She took another photo and got back in her SUV. "You'll be receiving another fine notice." She drove off, and I kept working until my woodpile was done for the day. I'd split about half a cord, enough to make a decent dent in my winter supply. True to her word, I got another fine notice on Monday. $500 this time for a third violation. I scanned it and emailed it to Thomas, along with a detailed timeline of events. He called me that afternoon. "I'm sending the letter today. This is looking more like harassment than legitimate rule enforcement. I'm also including language about the suspicious email issue and the pattern of selective enforcement." "What do you mean, selective enforcement?" "Well, are you the only person splitting wood in the neighborhood?" I thought about it. "Actually, no. I've seen at least 2 other people with wood piles." "Have they been fined?" "I don't know. I could ask around." "Do that." If she's only enforcing this against you and maybe 1 or 2 others, that's a problem. HOA rules have to be enforced equally. I spent the next few evenings walking around the neighborhood during my breaks from work. Ponderosa Heights was a sprawling development with a mix of single-family homes, most of them built in the last 10 years. A lot of houses had wood piles, which made sense given the climate and the popularity of wood stoves in Oregon. I found 6 houses with fresh splitting stumps and obvious signs of recent wood splitting activity. I knocked on doors and introduced myself. Of the 6 homeowners I talked to, only one had received any notification about the firewood rule, and none of them had been fined. One guy, an older man named Phil who lived on Juniper Court, said he split wood every Saturday morning and had never heard anything from the HOA. Katherine lives 2 streets over from me, he said, standing in his garage next to a well-used mall. She drives past here all the time. If she had a problem with it, I think she'd have said something. I thanked him and documented everything in an email to Thomas. The pattern was clear. Katherine was selectively enforcing the rule against me and Marcus, but ignoring other residents doing the exact same thing. The letter from Thomas went out on Wednesday, sent via certified mail to all 3 board members. In it, he outlined the legal issues with the firewood ban, noted the selective enforcement pattern, raised questions about the email notification failure, and demanded that all fines against me be rescinded within 14 days. He also requested an emergency board meeting to address the petition I'd submitted. 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Mr. Jenkins, this is Patricia Sullivan from the HOA board." "Hi, Patricia. I wanted to call you directly because I've been reviewing this firewood splitting situation, and I think there might have been some miscommunication." Her voice was careful, diplomatic. "I wasn't aware until I received your lawyer's letter that your email had been marked invalid. I've personally corrected that in the system. I appreciate that. What about the fines? I'm recommending to the board that we rescind them given the notification issues, but I need Katherine and Donald to agree. And the rule itself," she paused, "that's more complicated. Katherine feels strongly that the noise is disruptive. She's received complaints. From how many people?" Another pause. "I don't have the exact number. She handles most of the day-to-day complaints." "Patricia, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I've talked to several residents who split wood regularly and haven't been contacted at all. It seems like this rule is being selectively enforced. I can't speak to that. But I do think we should address your petition at an emergency meeting rather than waiting 3 weeks. Let me talk to the others." She hung up, and I felt a small measure of hope. At least one board member seemed reasonable. 3 days later, I got an email, successfully delivered this time, announcing an emergency HOA board meeting scheduled for the following Tuesday. The agenda listed only one item: discussion of resident petition regarding weekend firewood splitting restrictions. The meeting room was packed. Word had spread somehow, and at least 50 people showed up, way more than the usual handful. Katherine looked distinctly unhappy about the turnout. She called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. "We're here to discuss the petition submitted by Mr. Jenkins." She looked at the papers in front of her like they contained something distasteful. "The board has reviewed the request to rescind the weekend firewood splitting restriction." And someone called from the back. "The board appreciates resident input, but we believe the rule serves an important purpose in maintaining neighborhood quality of life." Patricia cleared her throat. "Actually, Katherine, I think we need to discuss this further. There are legitimate concerns about the legal basis for the rule and the way it's been enforced." Katherine shot her a look. "The rule is legal and properly enforced. Then why is Phil Sanders allowed to split wood every Saturday without any consequences, but Sam Jenkins gets fined?" The question came from Marcus, who was sitting a few rows ahead of me. "I'm not familiar with Mr. Sanders' activities," Katherine said stiffly. "He lives 2 streets from you," Marcus pressed. You drive past his house all the time. He splits wood in his driveway every weekend. So do at least 5 other people in this neighborhood that I know of. The room started buzzing with conversations. Katherine banged her gavel. Order, please. Donald leaned forward. I think what we need to acknowledge is that this rule may have been implemented without sufficient consideration of existing municipal ordinances. I've done some research since receiving the letter from Mr. Jenkins' attorney, and it appears there is indeed a conflict. There's no conflict, Katherine insisted. HOA rules can be more restrictive than city ordinances. But they can't ban activities that are explicitly permitted during specific hours, Donald said. That's not being more restrictive, that's creating a direct contradiction. I agree with Donald, Patricia said quietly. I think we need to rescind the rule. Katherine's face flushed red. You're undermining the authority of this board. We are the board, Katherine, all 3 of us. Patricia looked around the room. I move that we rescind the weekend firewood splitting ban and refund any fines collected under this rule. I second the motion, Donald said. They voted. Patricia and Donald in favor, Katherine opposed. The rule was rescinded. The room erupted in applause. Katherine sat rigid in her chair, staring straight ahead. After a moment, she stood up, gathered her papers, and walked out of the meeting without another word. Patricia took over, looking shaken but relieved. The motion carries. We'll process refunds for anyone who was fined under this rule within 30 days. I apologize to Mr. Jenkins and anyone else who was affected by this situation. Moving forward, the board will ensure better notification and community input before implementing new rules. The meeting adjourned, and several people came up to thank me for pushing the issue. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. You actually did it, man. I thought we were stuck with that ridiculous rule forever. Patricia and Donald deserve the credit, I said. They were willing to listen to reason. But I couldn't shake the look on Katherine's face as she'd left. That wasn't the expression of someone who'd accepted defeat gracefully. That was anger, barely contained. Over the next few weeks, things seemed to settle down. I got a refund check for $700 covering all the fines. My email started working properly for HOA communications. I split wood on weekends without interference, getting my winter supply properly stacked and ready. Then, about a month after the meeting, I got a notice in the mail about an HOA inspection. Apparently, my property was due for a routine compliance review to ensure I was meeting all community standards regarding exterior maintenance. The inspection was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 a.m. I took a break from work to be present, walking around my property beforehand to make sure everything looked good. My lawn was mowed, the flower beds were weeded, the house exterior was clean. I couldn't think of anything they could possibly cite me for. Katherine showed up with a clipboard and a camera along with Donald. She didn't look at me, just started walking around my property taking photos and making notes. Donald seemed uncomfortable, hanging back slightly. After about 20 minutes, Katherine handed me a paper. You have several violations that need to be corrected within 30 days. I looked at the list, incredulous. My fence is the wrong color. It's the same color it was when I bought the house. The approved fence color was changed last year. All fences must be repainted within 30 days of notification. What's the approved color? Cedar tone brown. Your fence is weathered gray. I looked at my fence, which was indeed weathered gray, like probably half the fences in the neighborhood. How much is it going to cost to repaint my fence? That's not the HOA's concern. You also have landscaping violations. Your tree near the property line is overhanging into the common area by more than 6 inches. It needs to be trimmed. And your front door wreath is not an approved decoration. My wreath. It's a simple green wreath. Wreaths are only permitted during the holiday season, November through January. It's currently April. I looked at Donald. Is this serious? He shifted uncomfortably. The rules do specify seasonal decorations. And these violations just happened to be discovered right after the Firewood ruling. Catherine's expression was ice. This is a routine inspection. Your property was due. If you don't correct these violations within 30 days, you'll be fined $50 per day per violation until compliance is achieved. She walked back to her car. Donald lingered for a moment. Look, I know how this seems. For what it's worth, I think she's being petty. But the rules do technically back her up on these points. Even the fence color. Nobody else has been forced to repaint their fences. I know, but once a violation is documented, we have to enforce it. He looked miserable. I'm sorry. After they left, I walked around my property again, looking at everything with fresh eyes. The fence was weathered but sturdy. The tree overhang was minimal, maybe 8 inches at most. The wreath was something my girlfriend had hung up because she liked how it looked. None of it was causing any actual problems. I called Thomas Werner again. She's retaliating. Tell me everything. I explained the inspection and the violations. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Okay, this is actually good for us in a weird way. Retaliatory enforcement is illegal under Oregon HOA law. If we can show a pattern of her targeting you specifically after you challenged the Firewood rule, we have grounds for a harassment claim. What would that involve? Documenting everything. I need you to walk around the neighborhood and photograph every fence that's weathered gray, every tree overhanging common areas, every wreath or decoration that's technically out of season. We're going to show that she's selectively enforcing rules against you while ignoring identical violations by other residents. Over the next week, I became intimately familiar with every fence, tree, and front door decoration in Ponderosa Heights. I documented dozens of weathered gray fences. I found trees overhanging common areas by feet, not inches. I photographed seasonal decorations that were months out of date, including, ironically, a Christmas wreath still hanging on a door in May on the house directly across from Catherine's. Thomas compiled everything into a formal complaint, which we filed with the HOA board. We also sent a letter stating that I would not be correcting the alleged violations until the board could demonstrate that enforcement was being applied equally to all residents. The response was swift and aggressive. I received a notice that I was being fined $50 per day for each violation starting immediately, which added up to $150 per day. The fines would continue until compliance was achieved, and if I accumulated more than $5,000 in unpaid fines, the HOA could place a lien on my property. They're trying to force you to back down, Thomas said when I called him, panicked about the escalating costs. But we're not going to let that happen. I'm filing for an emergency injunction to stop the fines while we resolve the underlying dispute about selective enforcement. How long will that take? The hearing should happen within a couple of weeks. In the meantime, document any communication from the HOA and don't pay any of the fines. The next 2 weeks were stressful. Every day I received an updated fine notice in the mail, showing the accumulating balance. I watched it climb past 1,000, then 2,000. I tried to focus on work, but it was hard to concentrate knowing that this financial sword was hanging over my head. The injunction hearing was held in Deschutes County Circuit Court on a Wednesday morning. I took the day off work and met Thomas at the courthouse. Katherine was there with an HOA attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Rebecca Foster. The judge was a middle-aged man named Harrison who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He reviewed the filings from both sides, then looked up at us over his reading glasses. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. Mr. Jenkins challenged an HOA rule that was subsequently rescinded by the board. Shortly after, he was cited for property violations that are allegedly being selectively enforced against him, while identical violations by other residents are ignored. Is that accurate? Yes, Your Honor, Thomas said. The HOA denies selective enforcement, Rebecca Foster said. Mr. Jenkins' property happened to be due for a routine inspection. Any violations found during that inspection must be addressed regardless of the timing. Miss Foster, I'm looking at the evidence submitted by Mr. Jenkins. There are photographs of dozens of similar violations throughout the neighborhood. Has the HOA initiated enforcement action against any of these other properties? We enforce violations as they're identified through our regular inspection schedule. When was the last time another property in this neighborhood was cited for a weathered fence? Rebecca hesitated. I don't have that information with me, Your Honor. What about decorations outside the approved seasonal windows? Again, I'd need to review our records. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair. Here's my concern. The timing of this enforcement action, coming immediately after Mr. Jenkins successfully challenged a different HOA rule, creates an appearance of retaliation. Combined with the evidence of similar, uncorrected violations throughout the neighborhood, I'm inclined to grant the injunction. Your Honor, the HOA has a duty to enforce its rules, Rebecca argued. We can't simply ignore documented violations. I'm not suggesting you should. What I am suggesting is that enforcement needs to be applied consistently. I'm granting a temporary injunction against further fines until this matter can be resolved through proper channels. Additionally, I'm ordering the HOA to conduct a comprehensive neighborhood inspection within 60 days and provide a report showing how they're addressing similar violations in an equitable manner. He banged his gavel, and just like that, the daily fines stopped. I felt a wave of relief so strong I almost got dizzy. Outside the courthouse, Thomas was cautiously optimistic. This is good. The judge basically called out their selective enforcement without saying it directly. Now they have to either back down or prove they're willing to cite everyone in the neighborhood for the same violations. What do you think they'll do? Honestly, I think they'll drop it. Citing dozens of residents for weathered fences and off-season decorations would cause a revolt. Katherine might be vindictive, but she's not stupid. He was half right. 2 weeks later, I received a notice that the violations against my property had been resolved through administrative review, and no further action was required. But the tone of the letter made it clear this wasn't over. It ended with a reminder that all properties were subject to ongoing compliance monitoring and future violations would be addressed according to HOA procedures. I thought maybe that would be the end of it. I was wrong. About a month later, I started dating someone seriously for the first time since moving to Bend. Her name was Kelly Cooper, and she was a graphic designer I'd met through mutual friends. She was funny and creative and had this infectious enthusiasm for life that made everything more fun. After we'd been seeing each other for about 6 weeks, she started staying over more regularly. One morning, she came running back inside after leaving for work, looking confused. There's a note on my car. We went outside together. Sure enough, there was a printed notice tucked under her windshield wiper. It stated that overnight parking by non-residents was limited to 48 continuous hours, and her vehicle had been observed at my property for more than 72 hours. She needed to move it immediately or it would be towed at owner's expense. Are you kidding me? Kelly pulled the notice off her windshield. They're monitoring how long I park here, apparently. I looked around, wondering where Katherine had been watching from. This is getting ridiculous. Kelly moved her car, but she was upset. This feels really invasive, Sam. Like, do they have someone just watching your house? I didn't know what to say because it certainly felt that way. I called Thomas again. Okay, this has crossed into potential stalking territory, he said after I explained. Keep documenting everything. Every notice, every interaction. We might need to escalate this. Escalate how? Restraining order, possibly. If she's specifically monitoring your property to this degree, that goes beyond reasonable HOA enforcement. Over the next few weeks, the notices kept coming. Kelly's car was cited twice more for extended parking. I got a violation for my trash bins being visible from the street after 7 p.m. on a Thursday, even though trash pickup was Friday morning. I was cited for a small oil stain on my driveway that needed to be cleaned within 48 hours. Each violation individually was minor, but the cumulative effect was suffocating. I felt like I couldn't do anything without scrutiny. Kelly started parking down the street to avoid more notices, which bothered me on principle. Then things took a darker turn. I came home from grocery shopping on a Saturday afternoon to find my front door slightly ajar. I knew I'd locked it before leaving. My heart pounding, I called the police before going inside. 2 Bend police officers arrived within 10 minutes. They cleared the house while I waited outside, then came back out. Someone was definitely in there, the older officer said. He was a solid guy with graying hair and a name tag that read Morrison. Your back door has been forced open. Whoever did it tried to make it look like it was still locked when they left. Was anything taken? You'll have to check, but nothing obvious seems disturbed. It looks more like someone was searching for something specific. I walked through my house with the officers, checking everything carefully. My laptop was still on my desk. My TV and gaming system were untouched. Nothing seemed to be missing. But drawers had been opened and not quite closed completely. Papers on my desk were slightly out of order. Someone had definitely been here, going through my things. Any idea what they might have been looking for? Officer Morrison asked. No, unless. I thought about the ongoing HOA situation. I've been having issues with my HOA president. There's been a pattern of harassment. I don't know if this could be related. Tell me about that. I explained the whole saga, from the Firewood splitting ban to the recent stream of petty violations. Morrison took notes, his expression growing more serious. You think the HOA president broke into your house? I don't know. It seems crazy, but the timing is suspicious. Do you have any security cameras? No. I was planning to install some, but I hadn't gotten around to it yet. Morrison exchanged a glance with his partner, a younger officer named Chen. We'll file a report for the break-in. You should definitely install those cameras. And given what you've told me about the ongoing conflict, you might want to consider filing a formal harassment complaint. After they left, I called Thomas. He arrived at my house within an hour, which I hadn't expected. This is serious, Sam. If Katherine or someone acting on her behalf broke into your house, that's criminal. But we have no proof it was her. Not yet, but we can build a circumstantial case. The pattern of harassment, the timing, the fact that nothing was stolen but things were searched. What could she have been looking for? I thought about it. Maybe documentation. I've been keeping records of everything, all the photos of other violations in the neighborhood, copies of the notices I've received, our email correspondence. Where do you keep those? Mostly on my laptop and backed up to cloud storage, but I have some paper files in my desk. We checked the desk. The files were still there but had clearly been rifled through. Nothing was missing as far as I could tell. She wanted to see what evidence you had, Thomas said. Or maybe scare you. Either way, we need to escalate this immediately. I'm drafting a formal complaint to the district attorney's office. Will that actually lead anywhere? Maybe. Probably not without more evidence, but it creates a paper trail. And you absolutely need to get security cameras installed today. I went to the hardware store that afternoon and bought a Ring doorbell camera and 2 additional security cameras for the back door and side yard. It took me a few hours to install and set up everything, but by evening I had decent coverage of anyone approaching my house. Kelly came over that night. I told her about the break-in and she was shaken. "Sam, this is getting scary. What if someone had been here when they broke in?" "I know. But I've got the cameras up now, and we're pursuing legal action." "Against who?" "You don't even know who did it. The police are investigating, and there's enough circumstantial evidence to at least raise serious questions about Katherine." Kelly sat on my couch, looking troubled. "I need to tell you something. I didn't think it mattered before, but now. I saw Katherine's car on your street last Tuesday afternoon. I was leaving for work, and she was parked 3 houses down, just sitting in her car." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it seemed paranoid to mention it. Like, maybe she was just visiting someone on the street, but she wasn't getting out of the car, she was just sitting there. Now I'm wondering if she was watching to see when you'd leave." I felt a chill run down my spine. "How long was she there?" "I don't know. She was there when I left around 9:30. I have no idea when she arrived or when she left." This was getting more disturbing by the minute. I shared Kelly's information with both the police and Thomas. Morrison called me the next day. "We'd like to talk to Miss Chambers." "Do you have her address?" I gave it to him, along with her phone number from the HOA directory. "What are you going to ask her?" "Just general questions at this point. Where she was Tuesday afternoon, if she's aware of any conflict with you, that kind of thing." "We're not accusing her of anything yet." 2 days later, Morrison called me back. "We spoke with Miss Chambers. She denies being on your street Tuesday and denies any knowledge of the break-in. She did acknowledge the ongoing HOA dispute, but characterized it as normal community governance issues." That's it. For now. Without physical evidence linking her to the break-in, there's not much more we can do. But I encouraged her to maintain appropriate boundaries regarding HOA matters. I made it clear we're monitoring the situation. I felt frustrated but not surprised. The legal system doesn't move on suspicion and circumstantial evidence. Meanwhile, the HOA violations continued. I got cited for my lawn being a 1/4 inch longer than the maximum permitted height. I was written up for my outdoor trash bins being the wrong color, even though they were standard black bins provided by the city waste management. Each violation came with a demand for immediate correction and threats of fines. I stopped responding to them. Thomas advised me to simply document everything and not engage. We were building a case for a restraining order and a civil harassment lawsuit. Then, about 3 weeks after the break-in, my security cameras caught something interesting. It was 2 a.m. on a Thursday morning. The motion-activated camera at my back door triggered, and I got an alert on my phone. I pulled up the app and watched in real time as a figure in dark clothing approached my back door, looked around nervously, then reached out and tried the door handle. Finding it locked, the person lingered for a moment, peering through the door window with a flashlight. I was already calling 911 as I jumped out of bed. Kelly woke up, startled. "Someone's trying to break in," I said, pulling on pants while keeping my phone to my ear. The 911 operator answered, and I gave her my address, explaining that my security camera was showing someone attempting to enter my back door right now. "Officers are on the way. Are you safe inside?" "Yes, the door is locked, but they're still out there." I watched on my phone as the figure moved away from the back door and disappeared from the camera's view. Then the front doorbell camera activated, showing the same person creeping up my front steps. Police sirens became audible in the distance, and the figure on my front porch suddenly looked up, startled. They ran, disappearing off camera toward the street. 2 police cars arrived within minutes, but the intruder was gone. Morrison was there again, along with 3 other officers. They searched the area but found no one. "Did you get a clear image?" Morrison asked. I showed him the footage on my phone. The person had been wearing a dark hoodie and a face mask, making identification impossible. But there was one thing visible. The figure was small-framed and wearing distinctive white sneakers with pink laces. "Can you send us that footage?" "Absolutely." I transferred the videos to the police department that morning. Morrison called me around noon. We showed the footage to Miss Chambers and asked if she recognized the shoes. She said she owned similar sneakers, but that lots of people do. "Did you ask her where she was at 2 a.m. last night?" "She said she was home in bed." "Alone?" "She lives alone. No alibi. So what now?" "We've requested a search warrant to look at her property, specifically for clothing matching what's seen in the video. The DA is reviewing it." 2 days later, police executed a search warrant at Katherine's house. They found the shoes, white sneakers with pink laces, in her closet. They also found a dark hoodie similar to what the person in my video had been wearing. Katherine was arrested and charged with attempted burglary and stalking. She was released on bail within hours, but the damage was done. The story spread through Ponderosa Heights like wildfire. I got calls and messages from dozens of neighbors, some offering support, others expressing shock. An emergency HOA board meeting was called, and Katherine was removed from her position as president. Patricia took over temporarily. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings. Katherine's attorney tried to argue that the shoes and hoodie were common items and didn't prove anything. But combined with the pattern of harassment documented over months, the DA felt they had a solid case. I also filed a civil lawsuit with Thomas's help, seeking damages for harassment, emotional distress, and the costs associated with defending myself against the retaliatory HOA violations. The criminal trial happened 4 months later. I testified about the entire sequence of events, from the Firewood splitting ban through the violations, the break-in, and finally the attempted break-in caught on camera. Kelly testified about seeing Katherine's car watching my house. Other neighbors testified about their own negative interactions with Katherine, establishing a pattern of aggressive behavior. The defense couldn't overcome the security footage combined with the physical evidence of the matching shoes and hoodie. Katherine was convicted of attempted burglary and criminal stalking. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, with credit for time served, and 3 years probation after release. The civil case settled a few months later. The HOA's insurance paid out $60,000 to cover my legal costs, the security system installation, and damages. Katherine was personally ordered to pay an additional $20,000 and was permanently barred from holding any HOA position in Oregon. More importantly, the entire incident sparked changes in how Ponderosa Heights was governed. Patricia, as the new president, worked with the community to overhaul the rule-making process. Now, any new rules required a community vote with at least 30 days' notice. An independent management company was brought in to handle inspections and enforcement, preventing any single board member from targeting specific residents. And all email communications were verified and supplemented with physical mail for important notices. I still live in my house in Bend. I split firewood on weekends during legal hours, usually Saturday afternoons around 2 or 3 p.m. Nobody complains. Kelly and I eventually moved in together, and her car sits in my driveway as many nights as she wants without anyone monitoring it. The security cameras are still up, though they mostly just capture neighborhood cats and the occasional deer. I check the footage sometimes out of habit, but there's never anything concerning. Sometimes I drive past Catherine's old house, which has new owners now. They seem nice, wave when they see me. The irony isn't lost on me that they probably got a good deal on the place after everything that happened. Marcus still lives 2 streets over. We split wood together sometimes. 2 guys with mauls and a growing pile of oak rounds, talking about work and life and anything except HOA drama. His kids run around the yard while we work, and the sound of splitting wood mixes with their laughter. The whole experience taught me something important about standing up for yourself, even when it's easier to just comply. It would have been simpler to pay those first fines, to repaint my fence and take down my wreath, and park Kelly's car somewhere else. But giving in to unreasonable demands just encourages more unreasonable demands. It also taught me about community. When I started pushing back against Catherine's rules, I thought I was fighting alone. But dozens of neighbors supported the petition, showed up to meetings, and eventually testified about their own experiences. Most people want reasonable governance, not petty tyranny. I think about that sometimes when I'm out splitting wood on a Saturday afternoon, the maul coming down clean through the grain, each piece adding to the pile that will keep my house warm through another Oregon winter. The rhythmic work is meditative, satisfying in a way that has nothing to do with HOA rules or city ordinances, or any of that nonsense. It's just me, the wood, and the simple satisfaction of being able to do what I need to do on my own property without anyone looking over my shoulder, documenting supposed violations, or threatening fines for activities that harm no one. The wood pile by my garage is stacked high now, 5 cords split and ready. That will last me through the winter with plenty to spare. Maybe I will split a little extra and offer some to the elderly couple 3 houses down who don't have the physical ability to do it themselves anymore. That's what neighbors should do. Help each other out, respect reasonable boundaries, and leave each other alone to live their lives. It is not that complicated, though Katherine seemed determined to make it so. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she is working as a property manager somewhere in southern Oregon now, nowhere near any HOA. I hope she learned something from what happened, though I doubt it. Some people are just wired to need control over others, to find meaning in enforcing rules and wielding whatever small power they can claim. But that is not my problem anymore. Patricia has turned out to be an excellent HOA president. The monthly meetings are boring again in the best possible way, focused on actual community maintenance needs like fixing the playground equipment and addressing drainage issues. The kind of stuff HOAs should actually handle instead of policing fence colors and seasonal decorations. Last month, someone proposed a new rule about limiting garage sale hours. Patricia immediately circulated a survey to all residents asking for input. The proposed rule was modified based on feedback, then put to a community vote. It passed with 70% approval, and everyone seemed fine with it because we all had a say. That is how it should work. Kelly and I are talking about getting married next year, maybe having the wedding here in Bend with the mountains as a backdrop. We have been looking at venues and making plans. It is nice to focus on future happiness instead of legal battles and security footage. Sometimes I still get a little paranoid when I see an unfamiliar car parked on the street for too long, or when I notice someone paying too much attention to my property. The experience with Katherine left some psychological scars, I guess, but they are fading. The other day, I was out front working on my lawn when a woman I did not recognize pulled up and got out with a clipboard. For just a second, my stomach clenched. Then she smiled and introduced herself as a volunteer for a local environmental group, asking if I would be interested in learning about native landscaping options. We had a nice conversation. I signed up for their newsletter. It was completely normal and fine. That is what I am learning to expect again: normalcy. Reasonable interactions with reasonable people about reasonable things. The vast majority of people are not like Katherine. Most folks just want to live their lives, maintain their homes, and coexist peacefully with their neighbors. The Firewood splitting ban, which started this whole mess, seems almost quaint now in retrospect. If Katherine had just accepted the legal reality that HOA rules cannot override municipal ordinances, none of the rest would have happened. But her need to win, to maintain control, to punish me for challenging her authority, that drove her to increasingly extreme behavior until she ended up breaking into my house and eventually trying to do it again on camera. Pride and petty authority. That is a dangerous combination. I am splitting the last of this year's wood supply now, working through a pile of juniper rounds that a tree service dropped off last week. Juniper burns hot and smells amazing, though it is harder to split than oak. The grain is twisty, and you have to find the right angle. Marcus comes over to help, and we work in companionable silence for a while, the only sound the crack of splitting wood and birds singing in the trees. This is what Saturday afternoons should be: productive and peaceful, no drama, no harassment. Just two guys preparing for winter and enjoying the physical work. When we finish, my woodshed is completely full. I stand back and admire it, all those neat rows of split wood stacked and ready. There is something deeply satisfying about that, about seeing the tangible results of your work, knowing you have provided for the future. Kelly comes out with cold beers for Marcus and me. We sit on the back deck, tired and satisfied, watching the sun start to set behind the mountains. The air is already getting that crisp edge that means autumn is coming, even though it is still technically summer. "You ever think about moving?" Marcus asks. "After everything that happened, I consider it." There were moments during the worst of it when I seriously thought about selling the house and finding somewhere without an HOA, maybe a place out in the county with more land and fewer rules. But that would have felt like Katherine won in a way. "No," I say finally. "This is home. I am not going to let one terrible person drive me away from a place I love." Marcus nods, satisfied with that answer. Kelly leans against me and I put my arm around her. The neighborhood is quiet, peaceful. A few houses away, someone is grilling, and the smell of smoke and cooking meat drifts over. Dogs bark occasionally. Kids are playing in a yard somewhere, their voices carrying on the evening air. This is what I bought into when I moved to Ponderosa Heights. Not the HOA drama, but this: the sense of community, the beautiful setting, the good people who just want to live their lives. Katherine tried to poison that, but she failed. The community is stronger now, actually, because we all came together to stand against unreasonable governance. We learned that we have power when we organize, when we support each other, when we insist on being treated fairly. That is worth more than any amount of firewood. As the sun sets and the evening cools, I think about the year I have had, everything that happened from that first afternoon when Katherine marched across my lawn to now, sitting here in peace with my girlfriend and my friend, the woodshed full and the legal battles behind me. It was exhausting and stressful and expensive, but I would do it again. Some things are worth fighting for: the right to use your own property in legal ways without harassment, that is worth fighting for. The principle that rules should be applied fairly to everyone, that is worth fighting for. The idea that communities should be governed with input from their members, not dictated by petty tyrants, that is definitely worth fighting for. I hope Katherine learned something from what happened to her. I hope she thinks about it during those 18 months and realizes that you cannot treat people the way she treated me and others. That power, even small HOA power, comes with responsibility. That you cannot abuse authority without consequences. But honestly, whether she learned anything or not does not matter much to me anymore. She is gone, facing the consequences of her actions, and I am here, living my life, splitting wood on weekends, planning a future with Kelly and enjoying my home. That is all I ever wanted, really. Just to live my life in peace. The security camera footage from that night is still saved on my computer, backed up in multiple places. I will probably never delete it. It is proof, evidence, a reminder of how bad things got and how they were resolved. Sometimes I am tempted to watch it again, but I never do. I do not need to relive that fear, that violation of someone trying to break into my home. What I need is to move forward, to keep building the life I want here in Bend, in this house, in this neighborhood that has become truly mine in a way it was not before all of this happened. Fighting for something makes you invest in it differently. This house is not just a place I live now. It is a place I defended, a line I held, a principle I stood up for. That gives it meaning beyond the mortgage and the wood stove and the mountain views. Kelly and I are talking about what color to paint the fence next spring, not because anyone is requiring it, but because we want to. Maybe something brighter than weathered gray, something that reflects us. Maybe a deep brown or even a dark green. Something that says this is our home, and we are making it exactly what we want it to be. The HOA will not care as long as we pick an approved color, and you know what? That is fine. Reasonable rules reasonably enforced are not a burden. They are part of living in a community. It is only when rules become weapons, when enforcement becomes harassment, when small authority becomes tyranny, that problems arise. Patricia understands that. So does Donald and the new third board member, a guy named Michael who works as a teacher and has kids in the neighborhood. They see their role as maintaining common areas and managing shared resources, not policing how people live in their own homes. That is how it should be. I finish my beer and stand up, stretching. Tomorrow is Sunday, and I am planning to do exactly nothing productive. Maybe Kelly and I will drive up to Sisters for lunch, or hike around Smith Rock, or just stay home and watch movies. Whatever we want, without worrying about HOA inspections or violation notices, or someone watching my house to document supposed infractions. That freedom, that simple ability to exist in your own space without fear of petty harassment, that is what I fought for. And I won. Marcus heads home, Kelly and I go inside, and another Saturday evening in Ponderosa Heights comes to a peaceful close. The woodshed is full. The cameras are recording nothing but normal neighborhood activity. My email works properly, and I receive only routine HOA communications about pool maintenance schedules and the upcoming community garage sale. Life is wonderfully, beautifully boring again, and I am grateful for every single boring moment of it.